When people talk about legacies, they usually picture marble plaques and shining buildings, something that stands the test of time. But standing in the dim light of Birmingham's industrial sprawl, I learned that legacies can rust just like metal. My name is Alex Harrington, and I come from a family that once forged the backbone of the South steel industry. Now, all that remains of our glory is dust, debt, and memories I wish I could forget. By day, I work as a materials procurement specialist at Brookside Manufacturing Plant. It's not glamorous, mostly contracts, budgets, and long hours under the sting of molten heat, but it's honest work. The clang of machinery, the smell of iron, and the sweat on my palms remind me that I've earned every cent. I'd rather that than live in the shallow world my parents built, one of empty parties and fake smiles. I live in a small apartment downtown, far from Oak Ridge Estate, the mansion that once symbolized the Harrington name. I used to visit my grandmother Sophia there, the only person who ever made that cold place feel like home. Even in her old age, her voice carried warmth. She'd sit on the porch at dusk, her frail hands strumming her guitar, and hum tunes that sounded like sunlight breaking through smoke. But Alzheimer's had begun to rob her piece by piece. Some days she called me by my father's name. Other days, she'd smile vaguely, as though I were a kind stranger. Still, she was my anchor, the only reminder that love once existed in our family. My parents, Michael and Patricia Harrington, were consumed by appearances. My father claimed to be a businessman, but in truth, he was a gambler in tailored suits, one risky venture after another. My mother, always immaculate in pearls and perfume, played her part as his glamorous partner. To them, family was a performance. To me, it was survival. The real patriarch had been my grandfather, Harold Harrington. A man of steel in every sense. He built Harrington Metals from nothing, one furnace, one worker, one deal at a time. People in Birmingham used to say his handshake was worth more than a lawyer's signature. I admired him, even feared him a little. When I was a boy, he'd walk me through the foundry and say, "Alex, strength isn't in wealth. It's in what you build with your own hands." Those words stayed with me, though my father never understood them. When I was 25, everything began to crumble. Grandfather Harold suffered a stroke in his office, died the same way he lived, surrounded by steel and silence. Before he passed, he gripped my hand and whispered, "Guard what we built. Don't let it slip away." I didn't realize then how impossible that promise would be. The will was read a week later, in the grand drawing room of Oak Ridge Estate. My father sat at the head of the table, his grin stretching wider with every word. In the end, everything, every share, every property, went to him. Nothing to me. Nothing to Sophia. Just Michael Harrington, heir of an empire he didn't understand. I can still hear the attorney's voice echoing through that hollow room. My father's eyes met mine with a glint of triumph, as if to say, "Stay in your lane, son." Under Michael's control, the company's decline was swift. Instead of focusing on the steel industry that had built our fortune, he chased after trendy ventures, solar energy, crypto startups, anything flashy. The workers began whispering. Contracts fell through. I begged him to reconsider. "Stick to metals," I told him. "It's what we know. It's who we are." He brushed me off with a sneer. "You don't have the mind for business, Alex. Just keep your head down." Within 2 years, Harrington Metals was gone, sold off to cover his debts. The same company that built half of Birmingham's skyline vanished overnight. My father pocketed what little remained and retired early, drunk on his own illusion of success. My mother followed him gladly, more concerned about their next vacation than the workers they left unemployed. Then came the day he sold Oak Ridge Estate. I thought it couldn't get worse until he told me his next plan, putting Grandma Sophia in a care facility. "She needs professional help," he said coolly. I could barely speak. She's not a burden, I argued. She's family. His response was a dagger cloaked in reason. We need the funds, Alex. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. That was the day I walked away from them. I packed Sophia's guitar, her photo albums, and her favorite knitted scarf. She looked so small sitting in my passenger seat as I drove her to my apartment. I promised her, "You'll never be alone again." At first, it felt like we could make it work. Olivia, my girlfriend, tried her best. She'd make tea for Sophia, laugh at her old stories, and even help her bathe on the hard days. But Alzheimer's is cruel. There were nights Sophia forgot where she was, mornings she'd wander into the street, evenings when she'd spill boiling water trying to help with dinner. Slowly, Olivia's patience began to fade. The tension between us thickened until silence became the loudest sound in the apartment. The breaking point came on a stormy night. I was working late at the plant when my phone buzzed with a call from the police. They'd found Sophia shivering at a bus stop, drenched and confused. I raced there, heart pounding, only to find her clutching her soaked guitar case, muttering my name. When I brought her home, the apartment door was locked. Her belongings, our belongings, were piled outside in the rain. Inside, Olivia stood with Ethan, my co-worker and supposed friend. Their closeness left no room for denial. "I couldn't do this anymore," Olivia said, her voice flat. "Ethan understands me." I didn't argue. Some betrayals are too sharp for words. I gathered what was left, Sophia's things, a few clothes, and left without looking back. We ended up in a dingy roadside motel. The air smelled of mildew, the walls thin enough to hear the world's pity seeping through. Sophia developed a cough that worsened into fever. I took her to Mercy General, where doctors diagnosed pneumonia. The bills piled higher than I could manage. I sold my grandfather's pocket watch, the last piece of him I had, for a fraction of its worth. When I called my parents for help, they didn't even pretend to care. My father's voice was cold. "You made your choice, Alex. You're on your own." Soon after, I lost my job. Too many absences, too many mistakes born of sleepless nights. I spent my days sitting by Sophia's hospital bed, holding her fragile hand, praying for her to wake and recognize me again. Each breath she took felt like a battle. I was exhausted, broke, and alone, but I refused to give up on her. That winter, as snow gathered on Birmingham's rooftops, I stared out the hospital window and realized how far we'd fallen. The Harrington name once stood for power, but all I had left was love, and somehow, that felt truer than everything we'd lost. I didn't know it then, but that was the night the ashes began to shift, the quiet start of something new. Because sometimes, you have to lose everything to learn what's worth saving.
The morning after the storm, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, but my resolve burned brighter than the sun rising over the wreckage. I told myself that if my parents could deny me in my darkest hour, then I would no longer waste a single tear begging for their love. I owed my children more than grief. I owed them a future. With nothing but determination and the help of strangers who showed more kindness than blood ever had, we began the slow, painful climb out of despair. Volunteers handed out blankets and meals, neighbors we barely knew shared words of comfort, and shelters opened their doors without hesitation. Each act of kindness felt like a small light in the endless darkness, and I realized that sometimes family is not born but found. Days turned into weeks as we pieced together fragments of stability. My husband found work in rebuilding efforts, swinging hammers and carrying lumber to earn what little he could. I took on 2 jobs, cleaning in the mornings, serving in a diner at night, my body aching but my spirit unwilling to surrender. My children adjusted, carrying their resilience like a badge of honor. At night, when they slept on thin mattresses in the shelter, I would watch them breathe peacefully and remind myself that every sacrifice was worth it. I was no longer the broken woman abandoned at her parents' doorstep. I was a mother forging strength from ashes. Then came the truth that set my anger ablaze. It arrived quietly, whispered by a neighbor who had spoken with my brother's wife. My parents had not refused me because they lacked space. Their house was large, with rooms standing empty. They had refused me because Jonathan insisted it would be inconvenient to share. He had poisoned their minds, painting me as a burden, warning them that my family would bring nothing but drama. And they had believed him, just as they always had. My blood boiled as the realization struck. They had chosen comfort and favoritism over compassion, lies over loyalty, but instead of crumbling, I let the betrayal fuel me. I refused to waste energy seeking revenge through bitterness. I would strike in silence, with success so undeniable that even whispers would echo louder than shouts. I poured my soul into a small idea that began at the shelter's kitchen table: baking. I had always loved it, and soon, neighbors who tasted my bread and cakes began asking for more. Orders trickled in, then multiplied. With the little savings we scraped together, I rented a modest shop space, painted the walls with my own hands, and opened the doors to what would become my bakery. It wasn't easy. There were nights I slept on flour sacks, mornings I rose before dawn, and days when exhaustion nearly broke me. But people came, not just for the food, but for the story of resilience behind it. They admired the woman who had been cast aside yet still found a way to rise. Word spread, and with it, my business grew. Soon, my bakery became a gathering place, filled with laughter, warmth, and the smell of fresh bread. Every loaf, every cake, every smile from a satisfied customer was a silent victory. Meanwhile, Jonathan's empire, built on arrogance and my parents' support, began to crumble. His business ventures, once praised, collapsed under the weight of his reckless spending and lack of discipline. Debts mounted, partners abandoned him, and the very reputation my parents had guarded so fiercely for him shattered in front of their eyes. I watched from afar, not with glee, but with a quiet sense of balance being restored. Life had a way of humbling those who believed they stood untouchable. Whispers traveled through town like wildfire. People spoke of me with admiration, of how I had endured betrayal yet built something strong. They questioned my parents' cruelty, asking why they had abandoned their daughter when she needed them most. Every compliment I received, every customer who praised my strength, was another thorn pressing into their conscience. They could no longer hide from the truth. Their shame grew heavy, and eventually, it drove them to my door. I will never forget the day my parents appeared at my bakery. Their faces carried the weight of defeat, their eyes searching for forgiveness. They had come, not as the strong figures I remembered from childhood, but as people broken by regret and desperate for help. My children stared at them with confusion, my husband with restrained anger. And I felt nothing but calm. They spoke of mistakes, of needing me, of hoping for another chance. For a moment, the old part of me, the daughter who had once longed for their approval, stirred. But she was gone, replaced by the woman who had built her strength from rejection. I looked at them, and in a voice steady and unwavering, I told them I would not become like them. I would not shut my door in their faces. I gave them food, a place at a table, because compassion was something they had never taught me but I had learned on my own. Yet I made it clear, they could eat, but they could not reclaim the space in my heart they had abandoned. In that moment, victory was mine. Not because I had outshone Jonathan, not because my bakery thrived, but because I had refused to let their betrayal turn me cruel. My children watched me, and I knew the lesson was etched in their hearts: strength is not found in vengeance alone, but in rising above without losing your humanity. As they left, I felt no triumph, only peace. I had closed the chapter of seeking love where there was none. I had found family in kindness, community in strangers, and purpose in my own hands. The whispers of vengeance that once burned inside me had transformed into whispers of resilience, of dignity, of victory without hate. When I tucked my children in that night, I told them softly that family is not defined by walls or names, but by love and loyalty. I told them that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, it means refusing to carry bitterness like chains. And I told them that the greatest revenge is not destruction, but showing the world that no betrayal can break you. I kissed their foreheads, turned off the light, and smiled into the darkness. The storm had taken my home, my parents had taken my trust, but neither could take my strength. I had built a new life from the ruins, and in that life I was free.